In the world of strength and power training, it is sometimes encouraged that athletes perform their lifts in a slow manner. It is often claimed that performing slow velocity strength training increases strength levels, power, motor unit recruitment, etc. But is that true? Will performing lifts in a slow manner increase your power, your explosiveness and speed? Not exactly, and there is quite a lot of science that supports this. In this video we're gonna go through the importance and why it is so advantageous to perform your lifts with speed, with fast velocity. Obviously, power is one of the most sought after qualities in any sport because when you are powerful you will run faster, you will jump higher, you will punch harder. Regardless of whether you're doing an endurance sport or a short sprinting sport, power is always desirable. But what exactly is power? I'm not gonna bore you to death with the science behind it, but this is just some basic physics that will make everything more clear. So power, as many of you already know, is work divided by time. So in a strength training scenario, which we'll go into later, for example, if you're performing a bench press, the bench press is the work, and the time is how fast you finish that bench press, and the net effect of that is how much power you generate. Now work is a product of force multiplied by the distance, that is, it can be simplified into that, so to say. So for example, when you're performing a bench press, you're exerting force against the bar, and the distance the bar travels against the gravity, that is the distance. So force multiplied by distance. Force is measured in newtons usually, and the distance, well, that's how far it goes. And we can simplify this one step further. Power is equal to force multiplied by the distance divided by the time. And distance divided by time, well, that's the same thing as velocity, so we can simplify it to one last step. Power equals force multiplied by velocity. This is probably one of the most common descriptions of power you will come across in strength and power training and sports in general. Now work, as you may know, is measured in joules, while power is measured in watts. So if you've ever been using one of those exercise bikes or whatever in your gym, you can see how many watts you generate while you're pedaling on that bike, and 1 watt is basically 1 joule per second. Now I have discussed the parameters in depth in my previous videos, for example what is power, but for now this is enough. If you want to learn more you can look up the terms yourself. So why is performing exercises with speed, with high velocity so relevant when it comes to power development? So let's say we have two athletes who are exact genetic copies. In the real world that wouldn't be possible of course, but let's just go with this hypothetical scenario. In this case it is possible. They have the same build, the same levers, all of that. They are about to bench press 100 kilograms, and let's just say that this work for them both, it amounts for 400 joules. There is a lot of parameters that goes into calculating this, like the gravitation, the distance the bar travels and all of that. I will provide a source if you want to go more in depth later, but for now this is enough. So let's assume that athlete A finishes this lift in 2 seconds. That would give us a mean power of 200 watts because it's 400 divided by 2 seconds, 200 watts. Athlete B, however, who finishes the bench press in 5 seconds, he would produce merely 80 watts. 400 joules divided by 5 seconds, 80 watts. And if you want a more detailed explanation, you can check out this source. They go into all of the parameters that comes with calculating one of this. But that's not the important part here. The important part is like the main message of the concept, that speed matters. When you're lifting, when you lift fast, you produce more power. And if you want to become powerful, you have to consistently produce more power in your sporting event, in the lifting room, all of that. How are you supposed to produce powerful actions in your sporting environment if you have not done this previously during your training? And this concept should be common sense, that we are what we train. If we train with fast speed, with velocity, we will become fast and we will be able to produce fast velocity. If we train slowly, well, you're gonna be slow. You're only gonna be able to produce what you have trained previously. This is clear in any other department of life. If you're trying to learn the piano, you have to learn it in a certain way if you want to perform in a certain way. It is exactly this concept in sports as well. Just to give you an example, common sense scenario. Imagine you have two athletes that are preparing for a sporting event, whatever that may be, a sprinting competition, a weightlifting, powerlifting, whatever. And they are given the exact same program. Let's say it's 3 months, this program, with the exact same exercises, volume, intensity, frequency, and all of those parameters. However, what is the difference? The difference is that one of those athletes will perform each repetition with maximal speed on the concentric portion. Like every single repetition is gonna need to be fast. He will recruit as many motor units as he can. He will put himself in a motivated state to produce speed in every single exercise, while the other athlete will deliberately slow them down. Now, considering that those two athletes are genetically identical, which one of those athletes do you believe will be faster and more powerful in the end when it comes to the occasion? The one who has done this like fast repetitions for 3 months, or the one who has been slowing down his repetitions? Now here is a very important distinction that you have to take very seriously. Performing fast repetitions does not mean that you have to be reckless, that you perform your lifts in a hasty manner. Positioning always comes first. If you have to sacrifice your positioning for speed, you have to take one step back. Proper positioning first, and then comes velocity, not the other way around. And beginners, they usually get this principle wrong. They confuse being fast with being hasty. Don't make this confusion. With that being said, when I say fast repetitions, I am merely referring to the concentric portion of the exercise. We have concentric portion and the eccentric portion. The concentric portion, for example, you're doing the bench press, that is the part where you push off. In the squat, that is the part where you leave from the bottom. In the military press, it's the part where you press up the barbell. That part has to be fast. The other part, the lowering part, that has to be controlled, because you can't just perform, for example, a back squat and then crash to the bottom. That will injure you. You have to go down with control on the eccentric portion. So basically, when I say fast repetitions with velocity, I am referring to the concentric portion only. So how fast can you go down on the eccentric portion? Well, you will choose a pace that allows you to have proper positioning. That is the simple rule that I have. Now there are some exceptions where it might actually be accounted for to perform deliberately slow and controlled repetitions, regardless of whether we're talking about a concentric or eccentric contraction. And number one, that might be rehabilitative or very isolated exercises that's supposed to address an injury or target one very specific muscle, like rotator cuff strength or band walks and things of this nature. Because if you go too fast on those things, you might do it wrongly and you might actually injure yourself, because it's a hyper concentrated exercise on one single muscle. So better to do it in control. And the purpose here is not necessarily speed and power development, but more stability development. You have a weak point in your body that needs to be addressed. And number two is beginner athletes who have not mastered the fundamental movement of the particular exercise. You're learning how to do the squats, the proper bench press or whatever, the proper positioning. Then you might actually have to slow everything down so that you learn the proper positioning first. And then once you have that, once again, as I showed in the priority, then you go for speed. So what about if you want to gain muscle mass or you compete in bodybuilding? It's very common that you might see that they intentionally perform slow repetitions to increase the time under tension and therefore promote hypertrophy, that is, larger muscles. What about this? Should they also perform fast reps? Well, yes, it is true that time under tension promotes muscle mass, and if you perform deliberately slower repetitions, you will have higher time under tension than performing fast repetitions. But it is still probably in your favor to perform the concentric portion with speed, and instead you can perform the eccentric portion deliberately slow. Then you get the best out of both worlds. You get strength and you get hypertrophy, that is enlarged muscles, time under tension. But once again, it is still not that simple, because keep in mind, by performing slow eccentrics, you will also fatigue quicker, meaning that you will perform less repetitions. So the net results in terms of time under tension may not differ significantly than if you had done many but faster reps. For example, say, what is worth more, like 5 slow reps or 10 fast reps? The time under tension on both of those might be identical. It's very hard to say. I would say choose the way that you're most enthusiastic about, because chances are it's not much big of a difference.